Yeah, so yeah, I want to, as I'm trying to do in these morning sessions, is just sort of in a way fill out how we work with our minds within this very receptive type of practice, awareness practice. Stop looking at myself. Better. Okay. Yeah, and then give slightly more of the bigger picture in the late afternoons. So I want to follow on from dukkha with looking more at craving and aversion this morning, how we work with the various manifestations of craving and aversion, and they have a lot of friends, don't they? There's a big subgroups for each of those two main poisons, craving and aversion, which I'll maybe go into a bit more in the meditation, but I'm just going to say a couple of things first to set the scene. So again, just like dukkha, it's I think it's just really easy to sort of have that background feel that they shouldn't be arising or they shouldn't be happening, rather than to see them as completely natural to the mind. And if you like, I quite like this perspective, they're just doing their job. You know, craving craves, it wanting wants. That's its sort of raison d'etre. And aversion sort of doesn't want, it sort of pushes away. They both have certain characteristics and certain sort of functions in the mind, so they're not a mistake. They're like everything else, they're dependent upon causes and conditions, and so they depending on those causes and conditions, they'll come into being when the fuel runs out. So do they go until the next time. And yeah, it can be a little hard to because of our desires to seek what's more pleasant and to run away from what's more difficult or unpleasant. It can be quite hard, quite a practice to think I'm just to stay with this, just to, in a way, to let awareness and wisdom do their job. They have their own job descriptions too. Awareness just notices, just knows what's happening in this spacious, open way. A right view, clearly knows whether this is something that's helpful to the mind or not. Clearly it recognizes that aspect of it, whether it's skillful or unskillful mind factor. Not to judge it or to try and change it, but it will recognize that. It will know that certain things are helpful to further the growth of awareness and wisdom, and certain things are not in themselves, but they can still be used as objects from which to grow awareness. So the practice is about watching what's naturally occurring in the mind and noticing all our attempts to try and subvert or to interfere with or to change or manipulate our experience, lots and lots of ways. And we do that because we have a sense of self, and we have a lot of ideas and views about that, who we are, and those things are important to us. So it's natural that we would try and, if you like, keep this keep our experience in a way that sort of backs up this sense of who we are. Maybe just to give you a little example. Sometimes we can have thoughts, and thoughts well, a lot of the time we have thoughts, but we can have thoughts that we don't like. Maybe it's quite a mean thought or a petty thought. And there can be the feeling I'm not the sort of person who has those thoughts. I don't want to be like that. So there's a desire to sort of swerve and not quite just say, just awareness is recognizing what's happening. There's a thought, okay, an akusala thought, and just to be able to be with how that feels, and any reaction to that. But there can often at that point be a desire to either go unconscious around that that's not really happening, or to try and sort of manipulate it in some sort of way. And sometimes in practice, we consciously do that. We consciously cultivate the opposite. You know, see something unskillful, that's the strategy, that's the practice, is to cultivate the opposite. But in this practice, it's not. It's to see clearly, to recognize clearly what's happening without any sense of judging or blaming, condemning the experience, but just to see, okay, in this moment, this is what's happening. How does what's happening, what effect does it have on the mind? What effect does the mind and heart, does this type of aversion have? Maybe there's a couple of moments later when there's perhaps a really sort of joyful kusala moment, and you can see what effect that has on the mind and body. So maybe something that's quite important to drop in is an idea of personal effort versus natural effort. Maybe that's just the best way to put it. So often when we're working sort of consciously and we think we decide I'm going to cultivate the opposite or something, or I'm going to try and do something about this mind state, we're using personal effort. We can do that consciously or unconsciously. And in practice, usually, hopefully, we're doing it quite consciously. In this practice, we're relying less on personal effort, and we're relying more on the cultivation, very subtle cultivation through awareness and wisdom, to bring into being more of those qualities. So that natural, so that in the end they become stronger forces in the mind, and if you like, they do their job by clearly knowing what's happening, which helps those unskillful factors to decrease, because they're seen clearly as not helpful to the mind, conducing to suffering. So there's a natural sort of letting go. So sometimes it can feel like I should be doing something. Why aren't I doing something? And a bit of a tussle in the mind. But if you have that perspective that, if you like, personal effort can only go so far. It keeps you within the known, what I know how to do. Whereas awareness and wisdom have a greater reach if we allow them to grow and strengthen in the mind. So then we might find things happening that do take us a bit by surprise. Perhaps different responses, different ways of viewing a situation. And that's a sign, if you like, it's a sign that awareness and wisdom are sort of up and running on their own in those moments and to some extent. And what we're looking to do with the continuity of practice is for them to become stronger and stronger factors in the mind. So sometimes that might mean that you experience the klesha lessening in intensity when it's clearly known in awareness. May not happen, and it usually doesn't happen if we've got some agenda of wanting it to happen. But often it may decrease in intensity. Sometimes I've experienced it just pops. It's like it's a bubble that just bursts, and oh, what seems such a sort of solid state of, maybe it's of longing for something, so really caught in craving, or just a clear irritation in the mind. It can just pop, and then there's something else there altogether. So where did it go? And that in itself is a very helpful experience to have. I imagine that you've all had that experience at times in practice. But maybe the difference here is that we're watching the process. We're watching actually to see what is it, what are the conditions that support the growth of awareness and wisdom, and the conditions that support clearer seeing and not sort of buying into, not identifying with craving and aversion. So before we sit, I want to mention one more thing, which I often do at this point, and it's to do with the practice, talking about the practice as watching the mind as it sort of naturally does its thing, watching that sort of the way the sort of constructing goes on, the building of certain sort of mind states, the building something that keeps our sense of self intact. And how the image of the naturalist can be quite a help one, watching what's happening naturally occurring. So one of my favorite bits of David Attenborough footage, him being a naturalist and all, working in the field, is of him with the gorillas, David and the gorillas. It's one of the top 10 YouTube bits. And so I imagine some of you have seen it and some of you haven't. So I'll just describe. So David goes sort of creeping. They set it up. It's taken ages to set up. It's quite dangerous. They don't know what's going to happen. He's in Africa somewhere, a small sort of camera crew, and they want to film him with the gorillas to see how they'll. I don't know what their purposes is. Anyway, he creeps gorilla-like into this long grass where they are known to hang out. This big group of gorillas. And yes, it is a dangerous situation. It is quite risky because we really don't know how these wild animals will react. But they come very close. He mimics their behavior to some extent. So they're probably not fooled, but they're not threatened either by him, and they start sort of patting him and looking for fleas and sort of grooming him, so showing signs of acceptance of this stranger in their midst. And he's just got this huge grin on his face. He is so chuffed to be there, despite all its risks. There's this real sense of delight and wonder about him. So sometimes I like to think of the gorillas as a bit like our big, scary mind states, when the states that we find difficult to be with, and that sometimes overwhelm us. So fear and doubt and judgment, maybe anger, or sometimes it's a different sort of thing. It's like vulnerability, sort of opening to something, helplessness. So what that image of David and the gorillas says for me is it gives the sense of possibility of a relationship to those mind states, of meeting them not with more fear or aversion or judgment, but with a sense of perhaps not delight and wonder, but some degree of curiosity, some degree of, oh, this is what you are. I see you, and I'm not sort of having a sort of, I see you not in a confronting sort of way, but in a way that I'm just about able to be open to you. And I think this is quite a space to be in, quite a valuable practice space. I think we can learn not to be afraid of our own minds, afraid of what they throw up, because sometimes these, they are big, scary mind states, and that's scary, but because of the sense of threat to our idea of who we are. And because of the strength of the reaction to them, it just creates a perfect storm of pain and pain and all sorts of other difficult things. So I think it's an area of the practice where we can learn to be less defended from ourselves, and able to take on more. This too is part of what's happening in this particular psychophysical organism that is me at the moment. This too, in this moment. I always loved it when I think I heard there was a little interaction with Bhante that some of you will know, I think, with an order member who's dead now called Vajradevi. Actually, I'm not sure if these are connected. Anyways, there was they were talking about in some study seminar about being on a desert island, and I think maybe that she joked that she, they were joking about who would eat who, and I think she joked that Bhante joked that he would eat her, basically. She thought that she'd eat him, and then in my mind there's a connection which may not be true, but at some point he said, "Oh, I'm much better than you think I am, and I'm much worse." This perhaps has different connotations now since he's come off his pedestal, which he was still very much on in those days. But that sense of being bigger, that actually there's masses of us that perhaps doesn't get to come through into this these ideas about who we think we are. We limit ourselves for better and for worse. And Pema Chodron talks about this area of working with big scary mind states. She says it's where the warrior learns compassion. I really like this. If we can have some degree of acceptance and being willing to be with our own hearts and minds in the times when we're scared or really tight and tense, or struggling with anger, then we can have the same sort of compassionate response for others. Okay, so that's all I want to say. So this morning we're going to do a couple of meditations. And first of all, I thought I would introduce another resourcing little practice. This is by Rick Hanson, he of the garden imagery, which I found very helpful. So maybe just one thing to say about it beforehand. Well, one aspect of it, he has a separate little framework. He's talking about what he calls the flow of goodness, or perhaps even a flow of love, and on different levels. And he says at its simplest level, you've got the flow of connection from maybe I don't know, you see a dog comes up to you in this, a dog wants to be petted or something in the street, and there's a good feeling, and you can feel a good feeling from the dog or from the dog's owner and yourself, or I think a child in the street, or maybe it's just a person. You have a little interaction in a shop. So just very small exchanges. And on different levels, you can have those exchanges with, they can grow in significance and grow in feeling depending on the relationship that you have. A supportive sort of interaction with a partner or a community member, or love coming from a family member, or there are many different ways, and this practice really acknowledges all the different strands, and so that comes into part of this practice, just that idea of those different ways of giving and receiving, ways that we receive and that we actually very naturally often give of ourselves and create connection. Okay, so let's sit, and I'll lead that short resourcing practice, and then we'll go straight into the first of the practices, exploring craving and aversion. So just to say, at the end of the meditation, I'll read something from Sharon Salzberg just to finish off. So this little resourcing practice is, we'll just go for a few minutes, but feel free to come back to it at any point when it might feel helpful. So it uses the imagination. So in the first little stage, we just connect or imagine a time when we felt in touch with qualities of calm strength. So this can be, you can connect this to the physical body. So it could be when you're out walking, perhaps you're walking quite fast. Or maybe you're in the garden and enjoying, there's a memory perhaps of enjoying digging, bending and stretching. And there's quite an integrated feel, this calmness and strength. And you can just let different images come into your mind, or you might find that the attention stays with one thing in particular. And if you have a little bit of a sense of that calm strength, and just letting it come more into the body, letting it inhabit your physical sense. So perhaps that memory of how it was is able to come into your experience now as you're sitting in an embodied way. And then in the next stage, this is the stage of okay now. And this speaks to that whatever is going on in our broader lives, or however we might be feeling, often in this moment now we're okay. We can connect somewhere with okayness. Perhaps you're okay in this room, okay sitting in connection with your body, breath, and in this present moment. So each time you land in the present, there can be a connection remade with being okay now. And this can be quite subtle, it can be quite slight, or quite clear and obvious. And then the third stage, the flow of goodness, flow of love, flow of connection. So wherever your mind naturally goes in terms of connecting little moments that you valued perhaps over the last few days, connecting with life in any of its forms, including plant life, bird life, animal and human beings. We're not particularly looking to actively generate anything, but using the memories of those times that have already occurred, naturally occurring. And notice where in your body you might feel that flow of connection or goodness, or whatever you'd like to call it. And it can change really fast, different images, different memories, different imaginings. And on the whole, let your own heart and mind find them. It's often not necessary to strongly seek them out. When we look, they're often there at our disposal. The kindness of a neighbor, even a moment of connection through something you've been reading or hearing about. You can establish a sense of positive flow in the mind and in the body. And we can just sit with this. Perhaps sit with how body and mind feel in this moment. Letting go of the resourcing practice and just sitting. So the intention now in the practice is simply to be aware of whatever is happening through the physical senses and through the mind sense.
It might be that what the attention is with is the effects of the previous moments of practice. Settling back and resting within that experience. Resting within it, but aware of it. And I'm going to be dropping in some of the manifestations that you might notice or may recognize from previous experiences, even if it's not your experience right now. Also, just let my words just go into the background. If you do recognize some manifestation of craving or aversion in your experience now, seeing if it's possible to simply recognize it with spaciousness and ease. And if that's not what's happening, if there's some reactivity around it, some wanting or not wanting of the experience, then is it possible to be with that? So aversion or not wanting can manifest as grumpiness or irritation, or some degree of anger or resentment. And we can get curious about how these things feel in the body and in the mind. any manifestation of resistance or tightness in the mind. Often tightness in the body too, contraction. Aversion might manifest in our relationship to our practice, in frustration, impatience, seeing what's wrong or what's not good enough. Not enough mind, not enough concentration or stability, not enough peacefulness or positivity. Whatever it is, we can come to know it from the outside rather than being in the middle of it, identified with it. And noticing what it feels like to be aware of even a slight complaint in the mind. Any sort of judging or comparing. Settling back so that there is this wise involvement. We're able to see clearly this mind state is a temporary visitor to the mind. Perhaps a frequent one, but nevertheless temporary. It's here on the basis of certain causes and conditions that have led to this moment. If we can manage not to put more fuel onto the fire of our grumpiness, or irritation, or judging, but simply observe it, know it clearly. We let the fire run out, let the fuel run out and starve the fire. So when awareness feels quite spacious and broad, you might be able to notice, what is it that's feeding aversion in the mind? What is the fuel? Is it a certain thought or a certain image or memory that arises in the mind, and you can feel a corresponding feeling? Like a naturalist studying body-mind interrelationship. And whatever is happening, any degree of these aversive qualities, it can all be happening. And if we have some degree of stability in the awareness and with right view, that's all that's needed. It's enough to be able to observe the storm. Noticing also any signs of greed or wanting to have a particular sort of experience. Wishing, hoping, desiring, seeking more of something. In meditation, greed or wanting can manifest as ambition, wanting something from the practice, wanting a result, rather than simply being willing to practice, willing to set up the causes and conditions that will make growth in the practice inevitable. Noticing expectations about the practice. And notice any sense of striving, which often has wanting at its root. Often craving is a little bit more difficult to see, to be aware of. It's often threaded through with some degree of pleasure, even if that pleasure is a mental idea of what we could have in the future. So noticing qualities like longing or wishing or hoping, along with a sense of enchantment with the desired object. It's all good. And noticing any sense of judging or that these things shouldn't be happening in the mind, or if they're not happening, notice any gladness that they're not happening. Whatever it is that's happening is just something to be known. Clearly knowing, without agenda. And noticing when right view, the Dharma perspective, is present in relation to craving and aversion. You might have some sense of clearly knowing the experience of craving or aversion as an object, arising, persisting, at some point disappearing. It arises without this sticky sense of personal investment. And at another time you might recognize perhaps something like the comparing mind. It's arising and you can see there's still some belief there, some buying into the truth of that comparison. But you can recognize all that in awareness. So there's some degree of right view there also. What is awareness knowing in this moment? Seeing if that knowing, that awareness can happen from this spacious, settled back position. Remembering the courage that it takes to do this sort of work, and remembering to appreciate your courage, your integrity, and your persistence. Appreciating awareness and right view doing their work. This is from Sharon Salzberg's book, A Heart as Wide as the World. Once, when I was sitting on retreat with U Pandita, I began to notice a recurring pattern in our interviews. Whenever I told him about a meditation experience that I thought was wonderful and impressive, His response was, "Did you note it?" In his tradition of practice, noting refers to placing a mental label on each experience so as to know it more directly. But I would sit there and think, what does he mean? Did you note it? It was glorious. How could I have just noted it like everything else? Other times I went to see him with doleful accounts of painful meditation experiences. He looked at me and said each time, "Did you note it?" I would think, what do you mean, did you note it? It was awful. Can't he understand that? It took a while for me to appreciate the simplicity and importance of his approach. He was asking me if I had been aware of each experience with spaciousness and clarity of mind. He was far less concerned with what was happening than with the quality of awareness I was bringing to it. What we want in practice is to understand the nature of our lives, and this does not demand a particular experience, but a quality of awareness that excludes nothing. So we have a few minutes if anyone would like to just say something, perhaps just a glimpse or moment about their practice.
Thank you, Vajradevi. I mean, I really saw. I mean, I have a view. I know I have this view, but I think what was helpful in the meditation was you actively encouraging us to look at them. But I have this view that I can't reflect on my own, that I need someone else in order to kind of reflect effectively. And on a certain level, I can see that that's a view, and it's most likely a wrong view. But I get caught in my headlights of vulnerability around it and get quite a strong aversive response to even going there, to even attempt. And I think particularly when you talked about calm strength, something I've noticed with the hand and fist resourcing exercise, and what I noticed this time around again, is I actually don't feel that strong. And it's a very unpleasant place at the moment.
Yeah. So I think, what you're pointing to, if you like, is the really the implicit quality of metta in the acceptance and the allowing of whatever is in our experience to be known to the extent that it's possible. You said there was some resistance, and in a way that's the fist, isn't it? It's the fist. So that resistance, to the extent that it's possible, and maybe not even, maybe that you can't directly support it with the other hand, or psychically, but that you can be in the same sort of territory. There's some relationship between this and it's okay on some level. But yeah, we have to be really gentle. Bantu says somewhere in Living with Awareness that working in this way, it's like mindfulness works at the sort of coal face of the mind. It is really, really deep stuff, and I think we have to be very respectful of that. Perhaps there's often the desire to sort of really to plunge in and to do more than the psyche is able to in that moment. And I think respect is a really beautiful quality. Actually, it's saying, okay, here we are right now. That's okay. So resistance is to be respected, is to be known, to be recognized for what it is, but not as a way of sort of blasting through or sort of, okay, I've recognized you, now I can ignore you. Okay, so recognize it. Here we are. What's that like? What's it like to recognize that? So I think in the practice we've got this sort of really interesting mixture of a lot of sensitivity to what's happening, and an unusual degree of clarity, of being able to see, and it's, I think one is dependent upon the other, because that sensitivity that enables receptivity and sensitivity enable us to see more clearly, but it's very delicate as well. It's very delicate territory.
I did notice with the hand and fist exercise that actually if I held my fist quite firmly, I felt better.
Okay.
It's very interesting that obviously there's that sort of sense of needing or wanting, craving to be held in some sort of way. And maybe that's the acceptance. I don't know. I don't want to analyse it too much.
Yeah, in a way, it's not about. You mentioned reflecting, and in a way, we don't need to sort of know. I suppose we can be happy not to know what it is, rather than start thinking about what it might be, and like you say, getting into analysing. Actually, it's fine not to know, and it's another way that the personal effort can come in and say, I'm going to figure out what this is. I'm going to plump for one or the other, and then maybe feeling a bit despondent that we're not convinced or we're a bit confused. It's okay not to know. Let in a way give that job to awareness, and the building of positive conditions in the mind. Perhaps wiser, stronger conditions than are available to our thinking mind. So fine not to know.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Anyone else? Okay, let's have, Garavavati, yeah, great.
Sorry, I could say, I think I'm having this experience of feeling like I'm not doing it.
What aren't you doing?
Well, I think as you're sort of guiding us, and I guess maybe I'm not quite, what aren't I doing? Well, I don't really feel like I'm being aware. Somehow there feels like a lack of engagement, I think, in my experience. And I guess maybe just on reflection, once the practice is over, I feel a bit like, I don't think I really did. I don't really feel like I really did that.
Yeah. So what are you aware of as you sit now? What can you notice? What do you feel aware of?
As I sit now, actually, I feel quite tender. Like I feel, tender, maybe like a bit emotional.
Yeah.
In a sort of nice way, actually.
Yeah. Any sense of being aware of your body, of the physicality of your body?
Yeah, I can feel a sense of just like my posture and
yeah.
Yeah.
So it is as simple as that, actually. It is as simple as, in a way, just reminding yourself what's happening now, and it will be quite ordinary most of the time. But if you like, you're using that mindfulness muscle. You're each time you resurface in the present, or you remember or remind yourself to be present, then okay, what's happening? It might be that you didn't particularly have the manifestations of craving and aversion in the mind, so maybe there could be a sense of not doing it because your experience isn't corresponding to what I'm leading. But there will be awareness of some things. There'll be awareness of what's happening, through the physical senses, and just keep coming back to that. Keep, it will feel different to a practice where there's a clear something to do.
Yeah, I think that's probably the thing. Is sadly, I don't think there's an absence of craving or aversion. I think it's it's sort of like, feeling a bit groundless. I think without form, maybe that's it. But like, and intuitively wanting to stay with something which is more formless, but just struggling, I think, to not have that form in a way.
Yeah. So then you can you notice that feeling of struggle? Yeah. Can you know what's that like? Feeling of trying to find ground. There's a lot that happens. Sometimes use the image of a sort of lens. There's a lot that happens behind. I can't quite come up with that right now. Anyway, there's the, if you like, with awareness, there's a process of things that are automatically happening and that we're identified with, sort of behind the lens. They when we become aware of them, like, oh, there's a feeling of trying to find my ground, it sort of comes in front of the lens. You're able to sort of see it a bit more for what it is and what it feels like. But most of the time, there's lots of things that are having their effect on how we are, and all the sorts of things of perhaps what we think should be happening or what we'd like to be happening. And gradually we become more aware of them, because we pick up some sense, oh, there's something happening in my body, or there's a bit of disgruntlement or something. You pick up on just a thread and think, oh, okay, that becomes then something to notice in awareness. But it's very, very easy for quite a lot to be happening, and for it to remain sort of within the mindset of views and assumptions and things. That's why the more receptive we can be, the more then we get to sort of, for them to come out, for awareness to take a look. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. That's really helpful, the image of the lens, actually, and what sort of what creates the lens and what's seen by that sense.
Great. Good. Okay, let's have a little break, and then we'll sit again before lunch, and I'll do the reading. I just didn't do it then. I felt there'd been enough words. So So we've got half an hour or so to sit or lie down or stand up, depending on your posture that you would feel would be support awareness. So I'll lead into the meditation, but I'll say a lot less. And the Satipatthana Sutta talks about being aware, being mindful of the presence or absence of greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's important not to forget the other side, the absence, and what's there then. But I'm going to start off just reading a little reading which I really like. It's Bhante from a seminar, a very old seminar on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it speaks to aversion in the mind and the projection of aversion that I was touching on when I was talking about dukkha. So Bhante says, "It is rather like the tiger in the Indian story wanting to eat the lamb. The lamb was drinking water from the stream, and the tiger was drinking from higher up. So the tiger professed to be quite annoyed by this. But the lamb pointed out that in fact the tiger was drinking above where he was drinking. So the tiger was polluting the water for him and not the other way around. So the tiger had no excuse for getting angry with him on that account. So the tiger said, 'All right, I am going to eat you for treading on my tail.' So the lamb said, 'Your tail is not here. Your tail is there. How can I be treading on your tail?' So the tiger said, 'My tail is everywhere,' and promptly ate the lamb. So when I get angry, get in a mood, well, my tail is everywhere. Whatever you do, anything you do, is going to offend me, and I am going to take action accordingly. So sometimes we just get into that sort of mood." Taking your own time to come into a sense of presence. Perhaps checking into that okay now space. Whatever else is happening. What happens if you can just connect very simply and directly with now, being okay now? What's that experience like? And in this moment, what do you notice through your senses? Mindfulness can be so simple. it's almost too obvious. But there's no need to look for anything more complicated. Right here, now. And remembering not to use too much effort. One of the ways that we can do that is to kind of stare down experience. And when we do that, it's quite likely to scare it away. So just looking out of the corner of the mind's eye, keeping that softness and breadth. Not trying to know everything. That often involves using personal effort, and it's very tiring. Settling back and receiving what comes to you. Receiving the breath. Receiving body sensation. Receiving a thought. And if it feels helpful to have some sort of anchor, if having some of your attention anchoring or resting with the breath, or with a particular part of the body, if that contributes to greater ease and relaxation, then that will contribute to greater awareness. So as well as knowing experiences through the physical senses, in the mind sense, we may well recognize some aspects of craving or aversion, wanting, not wanting. And we may also tune in to their absences, which may mean the presence of their opposites. So really noticing any moments of contentment, generosity, love, wisdom. Not holding on to any of them, but seeing how they feel in the body and in the mind. Sometimes when there are more lovely qualities in the mind, that can be when craving gets going. So just being aware of that possibility. The desire to cling to pleasant or enriching experiences. And seeing if it's possible to allow those experiences to come and go, depending on whether the previous causes and conditions sustain them. But they too will have their cycle, coming into being, persisting for as long as the conditions support them, and then changing. And seeing if it's possible for there to be interest in the process. Interest is a quality akin with right view, a wisdom quality. It's open to what is, rather than having a predetermined agenda.